All right. So let's go ahead and turn with me, if you will, to Hebrews 5. Now, you have heard over the past couple of weeks talk of a cat named Melchizedek. Well, I'm trying to be hip and top the jive lingo. Wrong generation? What? Okay. No, so you have heard a little bit about Melchizedek. I want you to put that aside for right now. I want you to reel back the clock, and I want you to pay attention to what Hebrews 5 is going to say to us today. In order to understand the significance of Melchizedek and understand the reference of Jesus in regards to Melchizedek, let's find out, first of all, what it takes to be just a regular human dude that has been chosen by God to be the high priest. So let's just look at the basic high priest. So, reading in Hebrews 5, just verses 1 through 3, let's take a look here. Now, a high priest is a man chosen to represent other human beings in their dealings with God. He presents their gifts to God and offers their sacrifice for sins. And because he is human, he is able to deal gently with the people, though they are ignorant and wayward. For he is subject to the same weaknesses that they have. That is why he has to offer sacrifices both for their sins and his own sins. Now, if you recall at the end of the last chapter, which we'll be touching again later on in the month, the author of Hebrews said something that for the Jewish people would have been like, what are you talking about? They would have been taken aback. Because he basically said Jesus is a high priest. And for the Jew, they know that there are specific requirements to be a high priest. First of all, does anybody know what tribe do they need to come from? The Levites, right. So, there's some certain qualifications that they must meet. So the writer here takes the opportunity and anticipates that there is going to be some objection, so he pauses to examine three particular aspects. And then later on in 5, he's going to do a reverse order comparison and applying them to Jesus. But let's look at just the regular dude. First of all, it is a man. It must be a man. And that man is, as it says in verse 1, a high priest is a man chosen to represent other human beings in their dealings with God. So, the main function of the priest was not to teach. It was not to preach. His main function was to act as a mediator, a go-between between men and God. No one is allowed to take that honor onto himself. He doesn't just wake up one day and say, you know what, I think I want to be a high priest. You don't go to university or to college and take High Priest 101. You can't have a BS in High Priest. That'd be a BSHP, is that? Okay. So, it's something that you have to be called by God for. Who is the first person that was called by God to be the high priest that we see? Aaron. And Aaron did not seek out after this. He was chosen by God. So no priest was ever a self-made man. Aaron did not say to himself, when I grow up, I want to be a high priest. It was only because he was chosen. And we actually are called to act that same. We are not to choose ourselves to be high priests, as it were, but we have been chosen. Now, we have been chosen kind of for the inverse, right? The high priest was to mediate between men and God. He was supposed to bring the gifts and bring the sacrifice of men, before God and basically be their advocate or mediator. We have been chosen by God to bring Jesus before men so that He can advocate for them before God. So we are kind of the reverse of that. Now, the way that I know for sure that you cannot choose to do this, you cannot be a self-made high priest, is by looking in 1 Samuel chapter 2. Is anybody familiar with the high priest Eli? Eli had two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, although I often mix up and say Phinehas and Ferb. But Hophni and Phinehas. Now, these were two, they were pretty bad dudes. So while Eli was high priest, his sons were running amok. They were having sex with women that would come to the temple to worship. They would go out and people would cook the meat for offering and burn the fat. They would have people go out and take the meat out of the boiling pot to be presented to them. They would take the meat before the fat had been able to be cut off and burned. So they were, let's say, not upholding the office that they would have been called to. And I say the office that they would have been called to because Eli was in the line of Aaron. So his sons would succeed him as high priest. But something happened to them. On the same day, they both died. God told Eli that this would happen. So on the same day, they died, and then Eli, when he heard about this, fell backwards off his chair. He was an old fat man at this time. And he cracked his head open and he died. And so the next high priest that was chosen by God was someone that had sat at Eli's feet, which would be Samuel. Samuel was not Eli's son. So even though you may be in the line of Aaron, even though it looks like you're next up, you cannot make the decision to be high priest. You are chosen by God. Mediation. In chapter 5, verse 1, the second half of it, he presents their gifts to God and offers their sacrifices for sins. In verse 2, and because he is human, he is able to deal gently with people, though they are ignorant and wayward, for he is subject to the same weaknesses that they have. The best kind of comforter, the best kind of person to advocate for you is someone that can understand what you've been through because they've been through it themselves. You all are in some type of work structure, right? And I'm sure that you've dealt with managers that seem to forget that they once started out at the bottom of the company. So they have absolutely no sympathy for the woes of the people that are underneath them. They just don't care. The high priest was called not to be held on a high pedestal. They were called to be sympathetic with the people, to be empathetic, to understand what was going on with them, and then to present them before God. He was to comfort them. So it's not, hey, I'm high priest. It wasn't, go get me coffee, Brittany, because I'm high priest. It was someone they could relate to. Gone through their pain, right? The best counselors are people who have had kind of messed up lives. And it's because they have the opportunity to share in some of the same experiences. The best advocates for those that are addicted have been addicted themselves at one point in time to something and have found a way to get themselves clean from that. They say that experience is the best teacher And those that experience are then able to empathize with those that are going through it. So if you're having problems, if you sometimes, feel like life is just letting you down, don't throw that away. Don't waste it. Don't deny that. Embrace that. Because of what you've gone through, because of what you're dealing with, because of what you're conquering with God's help, you can reach out to those that are suffering the same kind of things. You can use those hurts to heal others. The high priest was called, the high priest was the mediator, the high priest was a man that was weak, that experienced the same things as those that he advocated for. And he presented those people before God. In John chapter 17, this is one of my favorite chapters. It's where Jesus is praying aloud in the presence of the disciples. And he is praying to his Father specifically for them. In John 17, verse 9, he says, "My prayer is not for the world, but for those that you have given me, because they belong to you. All who are mine belong to you, and you have given them to me, so they bring me glory." So we are chosen. And I know that this extends to you and to me, because in verse 20 he says, "I am praying not only for these disciples, but also for all who will ever believe in me through their message." So, the questions that you need to ask yourself. We find ourselves being chosen. We're not representing the people before God, but we are representing God, representing Jesus before the people. The questions for you today, have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about your representation, your qualifications to represent Jesus to the people? The second question I have for you is how? How do you do that? These are the questions, and I'm sure you have some of your own, that need to be answered. These are the things that we need to discuss, because they will affect how we live our lives. There are certain qualifications to be a high priest. How do we meet those qualifications now, when there is no longer a need for a high priest because Jesus has assumed that role? That would be a good time to break into discussion.